guys, Sullivan Owen here in Philadelphia. I am standing under the arbor in my dahlia garden. I'm actually going to cut one of every dahlia that's blooming, and we're going to take them inside and look at all of them with the names and talk about which ones I really liked, which ones I want to keep, which ones I was just trying this year and maybe aren't keepers. So we'll have all the names, all the labels, and we'll get to see a ton of examples because it's 2 weeks later than last year's dahlia tour, and I'll talk a little bit about why I think it's a few weeks later this year, but they still look beautiful. There's so many amazing ones, a few that are the first blooms of the year, and it is mid-September. But I also feel like I have to show you the hyacinth bean that I am standing under. It is out of control. It really does not want to share the spotlight in this garden with the dahlias. So I'm gonna get cutting. I cut with a knife because it doesn't crush the stems, but if you're not comfortable with a floral knife, no worries. You can use, just make sure you're using really sharp clippers. And actually snips would be better. I'll show you my snips because they have 2 cutting blades. Pruners tend to have just 1 cutting blade, which crushes the stem. Okay guys, so I've got a good assortment of, I think, almost all the dahlias that I grew this year. There's a handful of ones that didn't have flowers, and I'll talk about, maybe I have photos of all of them, so I'll pop them up on the screen. But because there are so many here that they're not all gonna fit tabletop for shooting right now, I'm gonna go through them in color families, and then we'll have some fun kind of playing with color palettes. What I'm gonna do is, rather than take a chance of calling something the wrong name, I'm just gonna put them together and give some space, and I'll put the name of the dahlia up on the screen. All right, let's do some corals and oranges. I don't particularly love true orange, so I tend to pick dahlias that have a hint of another color to them. So I like the corals that have a little lavender purple to them. I like dahlias that tend to lean towards like a true peach. So for me, I kind of have to, because now my plan is to not grow all the dahlias together in one garden, but to pop them in for late summer, fall color into my different flower gardens. I'm trying to narrow things down to colors that work with the existing plantings that I'm putting in, and also trying to find the dahlias that have maybe a multi-tonal effect so that I feel like I'm getting a little more variety. It's not that I have any aversion to a solid orange or a solid purple, but for me, knowing that I'm going to have to limit the number of dahlias that I can put into each of these gardens, they do something special to enhance the plantings rather than just be like a block of solid color. I think it's a good idea if you're going to plant dahlias to plant a few different sizes. They come in, I want to say maybe 6 different size categories, and some of the more petite, they bloom really early and they bloom often. So, you know, some of the largest flowers take the longest amount of time to bloom. So if you're not starting them early, you're going to be waiting a while to get that color. So I think by planting a few different sizes in a color family that you like, you can get color continuously. I started my dahlias, if you watched the first one where we kind of walked around the dahlia garden, I had started most of these as soon as they arrived in 1-gallon pots inside my kind of cold frame, which is called a sun bubble. And they didn't get into the ground until they had been potted up for maybe 6 to 8 weeks prior. But we had such strange weather this year. So last year I was a complete newbie at growing dahlias. I knew I liked them, I've arranged with them, I knew lots of the names. I just didn't know anything about growing them. So I just ordered tubers and popped them in the ground at the end of May and then through the month of June, and waited for them to grow. And by mid to late July, I had blooms on some of the smaller ones, and I was starting to see a lot of flowers forming towards the end of July in some of the larger varieties. So this year I had installed in many places in my garden, but where the dahlias were going, no-dig garden beds with brand new compost and layers of cardboard. And so I had to kind of work with the compost. It wasn't, it's meant to kind of break down and be incorporated by worms and soil microbes to be brought into the soil down below. But the first year it was, you know, a pretty solidly packed layer. So what I was finding in the beginning of, so I got everything planted around the first week of June, which is basically when I got everything planted last year, even though I started them early. We had an incredibly cool spring this year with a very cold May and lots of rain. We had a pretty nice June, and then we had the most miserable, maybe late June through the second week of August. Temperatures in the high 90s, over 100. We have a ton of humidity here. I'm in Philadelphia, zone 7. Lots of humidity. No regular, like, nice rainy days. We would have these, like, torrential downpours, which would bring 3 inches of rain, which doesn't really get into the ground. It sort of, like, comes down and then washes away. And so the dahlias, I realized, because I had built the bed the way that I did, there was a low spot in there, and a lot of the water was running away from both the house and the upper gardens and kind of collecting in the center of this color family. So every day I would be out there working to, you know, try to help the plants along, make sure that nothing was getting smothered. I was just pulling out rotten tubers. And these were tubers that had started to grow in their pots already. So it was frustrating. It was disappointing. That's part of the reason I've decided not to just do the big dahlia garden again. When you have a layout and something fails, like in the center of this plot, it was kind of too late. I couldn't put more dahlias in. I didn't want to move any existing ones. I had to just kind of throw zinnia seeds, and I threw some calendula seeds. I'm happy because there's some color there and the bees like it, but I would have preferred my dahlias to grow. So there's a handful. I actually just got my first Big Brother dahlias, but there is one Fairway Spur and Papagino. Those are two in this color family that I absolutely love. Heat is great for sprouting and encouraging plants to root and some of those good things, but it's not necessarily great for growing a lot of height or for, in the case of dahlias, like bloom production. So this year, they all just kind of sat. I wasn't sure, and I've heard that from, I have some friends that also grow dahlias on garden.org. Everybody was saying their plants were really short this year. The heat, especially in the Northeast, definitely prevented them from having a lot of growth during July. So I didn't really start to see a lot of growth, especially in the warmer tones, until middle of August when our temperatures kind of chilled out. So they're not all here. I'm not sure if they're all going to show up, but a new favorite, I know the name of this one, caramel corn. I grew it last year and the tuber broke, or the stalk broke, so I didn't get any blooms off of it. So I think you either love red flowers or don't like them. I actually really do love them in flower arranging, and I have many flowers in the red tone family that I would consider to be in the brick rust red family, which might be this one, or some that lean towards like, that have some blue tones to them. So purples, things like that. So I didn't have too many that I feel like fall into the red family. And this one on camera is reading particularly magenta. And it was originally, in my view, coral, but I think that that's what keeps dahlias being interesting. All the blooms are different. You might have noticed so far that I've put out a few multiples of the same flower, and that's to kind of show you how much they vary from plant to plant or how much they vary from the stages in the bloom cycle. So unfortunately, I had mentioned, maybe in the intro, we had a ton of wind at the beginning of the week when I started filming the dahlia garden. And unfortunately, almost all my other burgundy and wine and red colors, the plants were knocked over. They were some of the tallest plants in the garden, and they were just blown flat down, which means sometimes you can kind of prop them back up and they'll be okay, but if the stalk is broken, you're not going to be able to get it to recover. So I just cut the damaged parts of the stalk off, trash them, and then I will go back and dig the tubers. So these are the ones that I feel like fall into the truly like kind of pink category. And the Uncle B is a new one for me this year. I don't typically go for this kind of white variegation at the edges. It's called Piketty when it's the reverse. I don't know if that's the case here, but it's a new dahlia to me, and I have to say it's a keeper because it really is this like most beautiful magenta color, and the first blooms on these were huge. They were in the designing video when I did a big palette of cut flowers from the garden. And a lot of people feel like Cafe au Lait encompasses the pink flowers, but actually there are Cafe au Lait dahlias, and then there is Cafe au Lait Rose and Cafe au Lait Royal. So I'll put up the seller's photos of those, but these are two from my I'm not going to say it because I'm going to get it wrong. I get confused. But these are from the pink Cafe au Lait plant that I planted. And I was worried I didn't get any. I thought that they were mixed up. So these were a little later to bloom, but my cafes, my true cafes, were blooming prolifically basically for the last like 7 weeks. I've had tons of flowers. And then the last group would be, I don't recall ordering this one. I will put the name up if I know what this one is. And this little guy, and I'll find the name for those. But these are all cafe au lait plants. None of the pinks. This is Shiloh Noel. This is a new favorite for me. I didn't grow it last year. I really love it. It's like a cafe with a little more lavender to it. This one, I cut it without letting it fully open so we could see the color, but I really do love that. All right, so those are all the identified dahlias for you guys in the different color families. Now I think I haven't really identified any to get rid of, which might be a slight problem. So perhaps my storage this year will decide what I get to keep. But I think it would be nice to put together a few little color palettes. If you can only plant a handful of dahlias, it might be nice to put together a little assortment of some of the ones that I think are most interesting. For watching my Dahlia roundup, I guess. I have really enjoyed my second year of growing dahlias. If you want to check out last year's Dahlia video, I documented like the entire 6 months and condensed it down to, there's like a section where it's only 3 minutes long. Dahlias can be kind of tricky to track down. For example, for this particular palette, I feel like Crichton Honey is a dahlia that would look really cool with this group. I have yet to be able to find it so that I can grow it, but I do keep an eye out. I have spent most of this spring and this year working really hard on getting kind of the structure of my gardens in place, new beds, removing weeds. We had some tree work done. You can check out the whole garden renovation series if you'd like to see how I kind of got to where I'm at today. I'm gonna do a better job this year of taking care and storing my tubers so that hopefully I don't have to get too many replacements next year. And now that I've documented how all the blooms look in mid-September, I think I'll have an easier time deciding which ones to keep and what will go where. You can follow me on Instagram at Sullivan_Owen if you want to see what I make from my garden. This year, obviously being an unusual year, all the floral designs I'm making this year are with materials that I have grown in my own garden. So it's been a really rewarding and interesting challenge for me. And it's also allowed me to really focus on growing things that make me happy, that make me excited to design. I hope anyone out there that is affected by the wildfires is taking care, staying safe. And, you know, it's just when you are growing your own flowers, at least for me, the experience of working so hard on my garden these last few years and really being out there, it's made me so much more aware of how my climate and the climate around us is changing. And you know, my heart just breaks for everyone that is affected by these fires. We have had a ton of torrential rain, and I just wish we could send it out to you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Share this with a dahlia loving friend, because I have never met anybody that doesn't like dahlias. Actually, that's not true. I know a lot of floral designers that don't like dahlias because they can be traumatic. But that's like a whole separate thing. If we ever do a video on designing specifically with dahlias in weddings, they can be very tricky to work with. But if you're growing for your own pleasure and your own cutting and enjoyment, they're less stressful, but they can actually be pretty tricky to work with in floral design. So thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you soon.